Yeah, so I just wanted to make an animation going a bit into shading and shadow and how you can kind of apply those principles in Flash and in certain things you're doing in Flash animation with your scenarios, as to why we don't do it on certain things, such as the things that are animated more, the things that are going to move more, and mainly, especially, the avatar that we have going through our simulation here. So, the reason why the avatar mostly is going to be flat colored and isn't going to have, shadow on the face or this, that, the other thing is because what, the shadow or the shade on your face might be is going to vastly, change based on your skin tone. And if we have a character with a changing skin tone, then, you have to have code to change the shadows as well. And then that just gets into kind of like, this bigger mess, as well as the fact that just applying shade then to this character that already is moving, so much and has so much focus on their movement. It's just a bit of, a mess. And, it's one thing to flat color something and then another to go in and make sure you're adding the shadows and that those look right for, 110 frames is this animation. So that's where, kind of the point of, attention to detail with adding shadow isn't really worth it in the animation, just on, the code-based aspects alone, but also on the fact that this is the most active part of the animation. However, you can still add principles of light and shadow to kind of, make certain things stand out, make certain things recede in the background, and just to add a little bit of detail, to your characters. We have, these people right here, and, the parts of their legs that are farther away from you as the viewer, that skin tone is just a little bit different, a little bit darker. You can see shadows kind of going along their side, kind of accentuating, their volume as like a character or object in space. And the guy's prosthetic leg even has a bit of, shiny on it, So there are, different ways that you can use light and shade and animate. It is just going to be a bit different because this isn't, like Photoshop. This isn't like a physical drawing, a watercolor painting or anything you can do where you can kind of gradiate things out smoothly and have, really, a soft shadow or highlight. You can make it not look too garish by basically, what you want for a shadow is basically just a bit darker version, either warmer or cooler depending on, what you're trying to do, of, what the skin tone is or what the tone of the object is that you're trying to change, and here on this poster, because it is such a close-up, we do have 3 different colors to accentuate the shadows. There's kind of this mid-tone shadow where, you have, the bust is kind of sticking out a bit more, and it's a lighter shadow on the face, but then, you have this darker color that's directly beneath the head, kind of on the upper neck, and in the inner ears to show that is a part that's receding from the viewer a bit more, and, these are animations, in the background. They're very, very simple, but, the cool thing about them is even, even if you're not, necessarily quote-unquote shading by adding really, complex, light and shadows, you can still add, there can still be principles of, adding, shade to create kind of this volumetric, distance, here, as with the characters at the bottom, the limb that's farther away is a bit darker in tone, the hair at the forefront, is a bit lighter than the hair at the back. With this character, his neck is a little bit darker because it's directly beneath his head and it would be a bit more in shadow. His pants are a bit darker because they're farther away. You know, so there's just different little things you can do to kind of show light and shadow, even if you aren't necessarily, you know, shading. You know, as well as the fact that, like, you know, you can't necessarily go in and add, like, you know, the ribbed detailing, you know, for this whole sweater, but the lines that are indicative that, you know, this sweater has kind of a texture to it, also imply that there is kind of, you know, a shadow there, a principal shadow. The same with this kind of, you know, swath that goes along, you know, this neck here, to kind of show a bit more of a fold, you know. And in terms of adding shadow to your animation, or things in the background, if you eschew, you know, the principle of shadow entirely just because the heavily animated things aren't going to have shadow, then it's going to just start to look a bit sloppy. Like, for example, if shadow was not added to these pants, like, at all, because of how this mannequin is posed, legs would just kind of, like, you know, mold together, you know, or if there wasn't a line kind of showing the shadow on a bit more of this, you know, dress here. And actually I just got rid of, like, there was, like, this line for the bust. Yeah, see? So that line for the bust is there, but then, you know, if you kind of color select and get rid of it, I mean, you know, then it's not showing the dress as kind of like, you know, this fabric that's wrapped around, you know, this mannequin. It just kind of becomes like this electric blue blob. And there even are the principles of light and shadow and this kind of, like, you know, glitter thing I have around the store or around the eye. And, you know, it doesn't seem like, you know, it just seems like, you know, this chaotic dots, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But you see there are kind of dots in a collection of darker colors, a bit more dense, you know, away from the light source. Then that kind of, like, you know, sparses out, and there's dots, you know, a bit more of a lighter color in the same, you know, color family, as you get more towards the light source. And, you know, that's an effect that you can use for really kind of anything, you know, glittery and shiny, and it will just add, like, you know, kind of, even if you're zoomed out, it adds this kind of nice gradient and nice level of detail. And when you're zoomed in, you know, it really does kind of look nice and sparkly, even though you're just using dots. So, even though with, you know, the tools that you have in Flash, which are, you know, just really kind of even though with the tools you have in Flash, which just really are kind of like, you know, this line tool and this kind of, you know, chunkier brush tool, and as you can see, the chunkier tools were made for, you know, a lot of my backgrounds. There are still principles that you can kind of, you know, go to make things, you know, seem like, you know, I have more of a shape than more of a depth, you know. Like here we have, like, you know, we could just do in green and, you know, there's kind of like this hill shape, or, you know, we can go and, you know, we have this shade of green, we add, you know, even just a little bit of a darker shade of green. And the other thing about it is you don't have to go in with the paintbrush again and kind of add, you know, the shade. It's really easy to use the selection tool even and just do that. So you've done that now, and, you know, there is just a bit more of that dimension, and just having those dimensional qualities in the background is going to, you know, it's a small detail and it adds a lot. And just because, you know, you don't necessarily have the shading tools or the artistic, you know, more kind of advanced tools that might be available in other programs, because this is mostly an animating program, there are still ways that you can apply the principles, you know, of art to have, you know, light and shade, even if it's just, you know, a bit more rudimentary. It's still going to add that dimension and just a bit more pop to your background.